Welcome back to the Fantasy Hockey Podcast, part 2 of our holiday special. The first part, if you're coming from that, is the Eastern Conference. If you missed the first part, you can go back and watch that, listen to that, or you can start here and then move over to the Eastern Conference. Either way, thank you for joining us for the holiday special. Now, a little bit of story time really quick. So Brandon and I recorded this, a few days ago, and I didn't realize until I sat down to edit that my audio was all screwed up, and Brandon's now on his way to Florida. So we were in a little bit of a pickle, and so the only solution we could come up with was for me to record this solo and use some of the bits from the last time that Brandon recorded this with me and kind of intersperse that throughout the video. So in moments and at certain points, I'll throw in Brandon's takes from when we originally recorded this, which was only a bit of days difference. There's not really much difference in the actual takes themselves. And otherwise, I'm going to take you through the Western Conference, give you points projections, talk about different teams, and all that good stuff. Like I said before, it's just like it's preseason. Now, there is a giveaway. So if you go to our Twitter, or you can, if you're watching this on YouTube, go below in the comments. You go to our Twitter and like or retweet the tweet about the giveaway, and you'll be entered to win. We're going to be giving away 4 sets of scarves and beanies. So it's a pretty good swag gift. And if you're a patron, we're going to be choosing a special gift just for patrons. So also pay attention to Patreon or to the Patreon Discord channel, and we'll be letting you guys know, you special people, what kind of special gift we're going to throw in there into the giveaway. And it's going to be sweet. We haven't decided on it just yet, but it's going to be cool. And also, just like the Western Conference one, the Eastern Conference one, apologies. I want to remind you that there's a script that goes alongside this episode. It has all our points projections, our thoughts, and it's written out in a way kind of like an article. So it's a good thing to reference here on out from the rest of the season to kind of go back to what we think about players and also hold us accountable. And on top of that, it's a really cool thing to actually follow along with in the episode. So you can either find that on our Twitter or our site. Twitter is at FantasyHockeyPD. Site is fantasyhockeypodcast.com, or if you're watching this on YouTube, down in the comments below. So without further ado, let's start off with the first team in the Western Conference. We're going to go in ascending order in terms of points in the standings. Let's start off with the Anaheim Ducks. Now, middle of the pack in save percentage, but awful at offense. They're so bad. They're bottom 3 in virtually every statistic you look at, whether it's 5-on-5 or all strengths. But there's one man leading the charge, and that is Ryan Getzlaf, who's leading point getter for the Anaheim Ducks with an insane, 25 points so far. That's not pretty. It's kind of weird because he's actually right on pace for when Colin had him. So when Colin projected him, if you look at his pace for the season that was expected from Colin's projections, actually right on pace. But somehow I'm still surprised. I don't know why, but I just am. I didn't expect him to be this good. He's a fantastic option, in my opinion, rest of season at a pretty deep position. He also gives you PIMs, if you count PIMs. Probably finishes with around 60 points, in my opinion, and solid peripherals as well aside from PIMs. There's also Andre Kasha, who Brandon talked about a lot more because he likes him. So let's cut to Brandon really quick.
Oh, Kasha. I'm always going to like Kasha. I like volume shooters. He's a volume shooter. I mean, it's kind of that. It's that simple. And the thing with Kasha is you see this when his ice time increases, which it has been recently. I assume people are going to listen to this throughout, the rest of January, the end of December or whatever. But towards the end of December, you were starting to see his ice time increase. And every time they do that, his shots increase. And I love that type of player. I love that type of player because that's the type of player that's going to do random hat tricks and whatever else. And I think that he has potential. I think he has a lot of potential. And that's always been kind of the frustrating part. He gets nice offensive zone starts. His on-ice shooting percentage, which is, I think that's obvious what it is. It's when he's on the ice, how many shots are going in as opposed to being saved, is super low at 7% or no, 7.7% on the season, but super low over the last month. It's only 5.7%. He just kind of can't catch a break, among other things. But I don't know if he's ever really going to be given a long-term opportunity with a decent center. He is back on Getzlav's line, which I'd love to see. I'm hoping he can make something happen this time around before he gets relegated to the third line again. And I would love to see him get more power play time. Last season, he was getting 50%. This season, he's getting like half of that. So, especially recently, 34% on the season, but more recently, it's been even lower. So I feel like there's potential here, and it's just frustrating to see it not kind of come to fruition. He's one of these players that I do think at some point we could see break out. It's just a matter of if it's going to be on Anaheim. I think he's going to be pretty similar to last year, like a 55-point pace, if he can actually get something going. He's below that right now, but unfortunately, I just don't think we're going to be able to see what I honestly think he could bring this season. So 55 points is about where I'd put him. That's like at a best case scenario, kind of.
A darling of the podcast is Ricky Rax. In my opinion, another 60-point guy here. Shot and hit pace is healthy and very similar to last year, actually. Nothing stands out as unsustainable, in my opinion, in either direction, unsustainably high or low. What you see is what you get with Ricky Rax. And again, very similar to last year, and I would like to see him take that next step. He's a guy who needs ice time to get better, and they're just not really giving him all that ice time. I would like to see more of that, but again, I don't think this is the season where he gets that. And there's Jakob Silfverberg, shockingly, another 60-point guy. Shooting percentage is a bit high, but that's due to an insane start to the season. He was really hot to begin, if you remember that, and now he's sort of slowed down. So I think his shooting percentage normalizes back down to within the 12 to 14% range, somewhere in there. His shots are down 7% on the season. He's a streamer option and not really worth owning long term. On the defense side of things for the Anaheim Ducks, there hasn't really been a fantasy-relevant defenseman in a long time. It's been a while since there's been one, and this year is no different. There's no one I can recommend owning long-term on the Anaheim Ducks, unless you're in super deep options, in which case the only person I like is Cam Fowler. Aside from Cam Fowler, really, there's just nothing more. They're all streamer options, and they have a lot of off nights, so they're good options to stream occasionally, but almost always, if there's another defenseman available, I'll normally take someone over an Anaheim defenseman. And then there is the goaltenders. Ryan Miller playing very, very well. I like him quite a bit at the moment and one of the best backup options. And then there's John Gibson, who's having a hell of a year, all things considered. 91 save percentage at the moment versus 91.8% last year. So he's doing really well, and the defense is worse in front of him. He's much better than league average. The issue is wins at the end of the day. That's really what gets John Gibson in trouble. I don't see the wins coming. I don't see where they're going to come from. And if wins matter a ton for you, I might recommend trying to see what the market is like and trying to target a goaltender who's going to get you a lot of wins, because they're just not going to come from John Gibson. If you play in an averages league, John Gibson is still a fantastic option. He's playing pretty much as expected, which isn't fantastic. It's not amazing. It's just kind of good enough. He's a solid above average goaltender on a very, very bad team. And that's going to limit John Gibson's ceiling. And like I said, the wins just aren't going to come. So if you need save percentage and goals against average, solid. If you need wins, they're just not going to come.
Well, I do expect more from Gibson. I get that he's playing, he's still playing above average, but Gibson is above average. So I've always been expecting him to do a little bit better. I think I want to say I made a hot take about he'll definitely finish the season above 910 a month or two ago. Still obviously believe that, but I don't know. I'm just hoping to see a better than even a 910, honestly. But this is the closest to an average goaltender we've seen him be in a while, and he's still not close to average, which is kind of funny.
The LA Kings, one of the worst teams in the league, and yet they are second in shots for and one of the best teams at limiting shots against. But they have the second worst power play in the league, and they have the worst save percentage in the league. So when you're looking for problems in LA, look no further than the goaltenders at the back and the power play at the front. Those are the two things that are giving LA the most trouble, aside from, of course, not having a very good forward core or defense core or goaltenders. But there is one bright spot, and that is Anze Kopitar. 32 points in 37 games played so far. Probably a 65 to 70 point guy now, in my opinion, with 75 upside if things go right or he overperforms. Pretty consistent at 60% on the season. Way less faceoffs than last year, though, down 13%. Shots are down too. It's the shooting percentage that's keeping him up, so that may be a spot of hurt going forward in the season, is if that shooting percentage comes down. He's definitely rosterable, but he's one of my favorite players to think about potentially packaging to upgrade a position, because especially if you're in a shallower league, center is so deep that Anze Kopitar there becomes replaceable. As you get deeper, it's harder and harder to replace a 65 to 70 point guy, but nonetheless, most likely Anze Kopitar is your third center based on how the drafts went, at least this year. He's your third or fourth center, most likely. If you're in a really deep league, maybe he's your second center. But either way, there's so much depth at the center position. Anze Kopitar is an awesome option to package in a trade somehow and try to upgrade somewhere. And then there's Drew Doughty, who is absolutely killing it this season. He still only got 40 points, or still only going to get around 40 points in my opinion, which is still a big increase for him from last year. And if you count peripherals, he's having a fantastic year in Bangers leagues. I wouldn't overpay for him if you're going to target him, I don't know if I target him in general, because what you'd be paying for is peripherals. That's where most of his value comes from, is from the peripheral department. And that's the thing that is most replaceable on the wire. So I'm never keen on trading for the sake of peripherals if there's not that many points coming back either, or at least points upside at the very least. But if you have him, I'd hold him. I wouldn't try to sell. So you're in this weird conundrum of, I wouldn't really buy just because of the price, and I also wouldn't sell because I don't think you're going to get what he's worth. So either you're going to overpay from one perspective, or you're going to undersell if you own him. Just because if you own him, it's going to be hard to just level out like he is. I think people are going to probably try to target Doughty with like some kind of package and be like, oh, well, Doughty's okay, he's on a crappy team, but we'll give you 2 players. So that's kind of my take on him.
Yeah. I still like Doughty for 50, which is his current pace. There's not a lot of competition, first of all, for anybody to be taking his spot if that were to happen, which as I just said, I don't expect. And he does, like you mentioned, give you, pretty good peripherals in a hits and blocks perspective, as well as like all right shots. So still like Doughty, but yeah, like you mentioned, I don't know that he's worth targeting. I feel like he's just doing exactly what he's supposed to be doing. So if what he's doing right now is worth it to you, then sure, but don't expect better, I guess.
Then there's Dustin Brown, who's had a disappointing year to say the least. Probably just a 40-point guy now with worse shots. I'm just not a fan. I think he should be dropped in pretty much any league except the deepest of leagues. Future is bleak. The power play sucks. He can't keep consistent deployment up on the top line. And at this point, why should they? He hasn't really deserved it. And then there's also Jeff Carter, who Brandon talked about a little bit because he loves him to death. And I didn't have much to say. So here's what Brandon had to say.
The one thing I like about Carter, well, there's 2 things. One thing is he's got triple eligibility now, which if you told me Jeff Carter, who's been a center forever, was going to be left wing, center, right wing eligible by like the midpoint of the season, I would have told you that you're like sniffing glue or something. It was. I even remember the first time I saw him lining up on the wing, I was like, well, this is a mistake. This is Jeff Carter. He doesn't play wing. Apparently he does. So, although he's still taking a good amount of faceoffs, but he's shooting a lot. This is kind of reticent of what I was talking about with Kasha. I like, if you're shooting, at least I know you're going to give me something at the end of the night. I might not get a goal, I might not get an assist, but at least I get the shots. Shots are usually pretty consistent. He's up 40% year over year shot pace. He's over 3 shots a game, which is that mark where I'm like, all right, this is a volume shooter now. You get above 3 shots a game. I'm thinking this is somebody I can rely on for shots night to night. His hits are, all right, a hit a game or so. He's just not getting points. I'm not entirely sure. Well, I am kind of sure why, because he's playing with like complete jokers for the most part, and he doesn't get much power play time. So I don't know. Put him on Kopi's wing rest of the season and give him power play 1. And he's trying. The guy is trying. You got to, it's like there's not a lot of trying going on, and Jeff Carter's trying. He's probably trying to get traded, but, he's trying.
Then there's Tyler Toffoli, who is probably a 50-point guy, but also I see 45 is more likely. He's also most likely going to get traded at some point here, and I would not hold for the sake of a trade. I've seen a lot of talk on Twitter about should we hold for the sake of a trade, because he's going to be traded at some point. And my take on that is no, because he's not going to be traded for as a first-line player or a key role player. He's just going to be some depth guy. He's going to be like Tanner Pearson, Tatar, those kinds of trades where guys just kind of ended up, or McCann, for example, in Pittsburgh. Depth guys who sometimes have a good time, have a little bit of time up on the top power play, top line, and get a few points here or there. But more than anything, their role is a depth player. And that's what I see Tyler Toffoli as at this point. And I think that's what he's going to get traded as. So he's not really worth holding on to long term. And then there's the goalies. They suck. That's it. Honestly, there's not much to it. They're not even worth spot starting, to be honest. The save percentage and goals against is just so shaky and so bad. Quick has a .458 quality start percentage, which I'm actually shocked that it's that high given how bad he's been. And there's Campbell, who has a .231 quality start percentage. Neither one is really worth owning long term, and neither one is worth spot starting. I mean, there are so many better spot start options than those two. I get they're available in virtually every league, so that's why a lot of people like spot starting them, but even that doesn't make them worth it. Now for Chicago, 3rd most scoring chances against and middle to lower of the pack for scoring chances for. They just don't control offense in games. They largely get outshot and outplayed. They have 84.3 expected goals against, most in the league by 10. and yet they have only let in 74 actual goals against at 5-on-5. Good for 7th best team save percentage. The goaltenders have been fantastic, but it's mostly been one goaltender that's been fantastic. We'll get to that. Let's start with Patrick Kane, who's a madman, and that's where all the offense flows through. Truly, that's where everything goes. He's a one-man wrecking crew in Chicago. I think his floor is around 100 again this year. He's been insane. Shots are down a bit, but that isn't stopping him, and on top of that, as of late, they've started to go up, so I think by season's end, we'll see those shots normalize to where he was last year. His IPP is a tad too high at 90%, but it is Patrick Kane, and literally nobody else is doing anything in Chicago, so I'm not shocked that his IPP is 90%, so I wouldn't be surprised to see it finish in that 80 to 85% range. Then there's Jonathan Toews. 60 points, I think it can happen. I don't think it's very, very likely, but I could see that happening. I think that's where I'll put the pivot point at around 60 points. There's a few things that look good for him, or at least are promising going forward. His IPP is extremely low at 55%. That should be higher. His shooting percentage is low at 7.5%. That's not like Jonathan Toews. And his power play percentage is coming back up to high levels. So I think he's someone to eventually grab. But right now, he's not worth owning, and he's not worth even streaming until he gets better and gets more consistent deployment. Because one of the things is that he's only a 44 consistency player. So that means that in 44% of his games played, he's gotten a point. That's not good enough for a center. There's a lot better centers than that out there, especially as streamer options. And so Jonathan Toews, pivot around 60, but it is tenuous and risky at best. Then there's Alex DeBrincat, who has regressed in his shooting percentage, and that's where you've seen these points kind of start to fall off, is after years of 15.5 and 18.6, we are seeing 8.1% right now. I think he'll end the season more at around 10 to 12% shooting, but he's been so consistently around that 6 to 8 mark this year that it's hard to see him making it back up to that 15 to 18 range. It's just not going to happen in my opinion. And without that shooting percentage, his goal totals are going to be really low because his shooting is also down. His IPP is insanely low at 33%, so that's an area of improvement for him where he can get more assists. But nonetheless, I still think that leaves him at just about 55 to 60 points, which is just not what a lot of people expected. Then there's Dylan Strome, another center, virtually doing what he did last year, but just with less shots. His IPP is up quite a bit, but I'd say that's fine given he's more comfortable in the offense, factoring in more into the offense, and just playing all around better. So I'm okay with his IPP being a little bit higher there. His power play percentage is now up to where it was last year over the last 30 days or so, finally getting a little bit more consistent power play deployment, which I like, but no peripherals whatsoever. He's really only worth owning in a points league or a points heavy league. That's where he drives his value. In a Cats league, it's just not worth it. You can get better. If you're lacking points on your Cats team, maybe he's worth it, but I'd say that there's better people on the wire than Dylan Strome at the moment. Erik Gustafsson, 40-point defenseman, I think. He at best, he doesn't shoot, he doesn't block, he gets some hits, but not enough to justify keeping him, honestly. He's a good streamer. He's sort of like Klingberg, but with less upside and a much lower floor, which isn't a compliment this year. So, yeah, I'm not high on Erik Gustafsson. I know a lot of people have kind of asked if he's back. I don't think he is, and that's mostly just because I don't like what Chicago is doing, rather. And then on the back end, it's really a tale of two goalies. Both Crawford and Leonard have started 19 times, so their volume is literally equal. They've done a very good job of setting up starts and balancing them out with those 19, but one has been significantly better than the other. Crawford has an 8.62 record with a 909 save percentage, 44 quality start percentage, 3.29 goals against average, and a -1 goal saved above average. On the other hand, Robin Lehner has a 6.10.4 record, a 9.27 save percentage, 6.4 quality start percentage, 2.93 goals against average, and an 11 goals saved above average. He's been fantastic. Leno should be the starter. How he's not getting more starts is beyond me. He's not getting any goal support in front of him with those save percentages, but he's also getting shelled. That's the only way you have a goal against average of 2.93, but a save percentage of 9.27 means you are getting just shelled night in and night out. So in a saves league, Robin Lehner is fantastic, and I'd say in many, many leagues, Robin Lehner should be owned. He has a great save percentage, mediocre goals against average because of Chicago. So if you can handle that goals against average, you're most likely going to get good save percentages, and you're probably going to hurt in wins. But if you're in a save percentage league, he's one of those guys that you could grab, and he might be able to win you weeks with save percentage alone. And especially in saves leagues, he's definitely worth it, even though he doesn't get that many starts. So you're probably looking at around 42 starts, between 42 and 50 starts, I'd say, for Robin Lehner rest of the season. Oh boy, San Jose. So here we go. Here's some fun stats. They are the lowest in even strength expected goals against. Right? So they're expected to give up the least goals against at 5-on-5 in the league. And yet they actually have the highest goals against 5-on-5 in the league. You literally can't win hockey doing that. It's impossible. When you look at the Sharks, they are a boring hockey team, a boring, bad hockey team. They're dead last in expected goals for by a whopping 10. They have the 27th worst power play in the league. They suck at even strength. They have the second worst overall save percentage. They just can't seem to do anything right at the moment. And on top of that, when I give these point projections for San Jose Shark players, you got to remember that their power play sucks, right? 27th in the league. And so if the power play were to get even a little bit better, what you'd see a lot of these point totals come up a little bit. And in coming up a little bit, or being able to get power play points, that's how they would actually alter those point totals and actually get a little bit better. And so the first guy here is Logan Couture, 70 to 75 point guy in my opinion. Solid shooting percentage on the season, but very inflated over the last 30 days. So if you start trying to get some trade offers or anything like that, just remember that. Very solid on the season, 70, 75 point guy, but the last 30 days shooting percentage has been insane. His on-ice shooting percentage is fine. His consistency is good at 60%, so nothing that kind of rings alarm bells there. Good power play percentage, even though the power play sucks. And his face-off win pace is up 20%, if that matters to you. I really like Logan Couture rest of season, but I'd be very cautious of paying for him at the moment, given how good he's been over these last 30 days, even though he has been consistent, so at least he's got that going for him. Then there's Tomas Hertl, another 70 to 75 point guy in my opinion. Face-off win pace is up 17%. A healthy shot pace, 53% consistency. What you see is what you get with Tomas Hertl, and he's been a little bit frustrating at times. Again, 70, 75 point player, but he gets a point every other game. That's frustrating to own sometimes, and you're going to have some stretches where he's not as hot. So you've just got to roll with the punches with Tomas Hertl, but I'm not low on him. I still think a 70, 75 point season is definitely there. Then there's Vander Kane, who actually leads the team in shots. Didn't expect that one bit. I thought it'd be Brent Burns, right? 70, 75 point guy again. The Sharks just have a lot of these guys, just very kind of spread out offense. Healthy team power play percentage, 55% consistency. Lots and lots of PIMs. The PIMs have come up a ton this season. Not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing at this point. They've gotten so high that I'm kind of worried they're going to start benching him a little bit. He's worth owning in virtually every league at this point. His expected goals for is 14.7 right now, and he has 14 goals. He's right on par with how he should be doing, and he's fantastic. And if the power play were to get better, I could absolutely see him kind of vying for point per game. But of course, you need the power play to get better for that.
That's the thing he's always lacked. He's never really been given the power play percent all that much. So he's getting a little bit more time there, and obviously still doing his thing of shooting a ton, hitting a ton, just being a menace on the ice and getting tossed constantly.
And then there's Erik Karlsson, Karlsson and Burns are a little hard to nail down because their deployment has shifted so much throughout the season. For half the season, Brent Burns was kind of the lion's share time on the power play. Now it's been Erik Karlsson for a bit. But it does seem like Erik Karlsson may be becoming their new Burns to an extent. It seems that way at least, getting tons of minutes, getting most of the power play time, or also playing with Brent Burns, but being double shifted at the same time. I think he's good for 65 to 70 points if he keeps this deployment that he's currently at. It's such a good year for him, even though the shots have completely disappeared. His shots are down 35%, and not exactly sure where they went or why they're disappearing, but they have, and that's really important to note. Everything is pretty healthy. His power play percentage, like I said, has been insane. His block pace is up. I really love me some Erik Karlsson this year. But again, if that deployment changes, you could see him more of a 60 to 65 point defenseman. It all depends on that deployment. And jumping to Brent Burns here real quick, I wouldn't have expected him to be this low of team point getters, yet here he is. It's weird. His shots are down a lot. His power play percentage is down. His time on ice is down. So right now, he has a big swing. I could see him as bad as 50 points if he doesn't get that power play percentage or shots back up. If those two things don't come back up, I could absolutely see him being a very, very disappointing 50-point defenseman. And I'd say at best I'm seeing like a 65-point ceiling with probably, 55 to 60 being the most likely point range for him. I think he does get less points than Erik Karlsson at this point. I still don't think I'd sell because Well, let's put it this way. I wouldn't sell if you were towards the top of the league or middle of the league. You've made it this far with Brent Burns, right? And Burns' ceiling is still insane on any given week. So I wouldn't want to lose that as a playoff contender. I would want to keep that. Now, if you're towards the bottom, I would entertain trades. I would listen. I would see what's up. But I'd be very careful because, again, if you're trading from a position of weakness and you're in the last place or wherever out of playoff position, people know what you're doing. They know you're trying to move with this slumpy player to try to get yourself into the playoffs. And so you've got to play it smart. You've got to be careful. But like I said, I wouldn't be against thinking about it.
I'm just frustrated with a lot of things. I'm frustrated with the shot depletion and the fact that the coach said that's part of the system now, which is like, I don't like that. Yeah. Although I do think there's, I don't know, maybe I'm just grasping at straws here, but I do think there's something to be hopeful for. Not a ton, honestly. I'm trying to sound optimistic. I want to be optimistic. I don't know that I am optimistic. I mean, we're not going to see a point per game Burns anymore, like we did last season. That was, a career year for him to begin with. I'm hoping he can get to 65 to 70 pace, somewhere in there. He's far from it at this point, which is upsetting to say the very least. But I don't even know where he makes it up unless he shoots more.
Then there's Timo Meier. I love Timo Meier, but he has been disappointing as hell. Low on-ice shooting percentage. I'm calling around 55 at this point with fine shots, good hits, and decent blocks. Good guy for peripheral leagues still because he ticks so many boxes. But man, in a points-only or points-heavy league, I think he's in drop territory. He's getting there. I'm benching him a lot in my points league. He's just hasn't been consistent. His deployment has been all over the place. His shots haven't been as great recently. There's just not a lot there. So I do think that you've got to start giving him a short leash as we get closer to kind of the middle point of the season here, and especially in points only leagues. I mean, if that pace gets down to around 50, that's it. He's done. I mean, even 55 is highly questionable. The only reason I'm holding on to him is hope that maybe he gets top power play at some point here, but I'm probably only giving him like 10 more games and then I'm cutting loose. Oh, and goaltenders, of course. How did I forget? Nothing to say there. Don't own any of them. Don't spot start any of them. Done. There you go. There's the goaltenders. The Vancouver Canucks have a lethal power play, and that's what they've been surviving on this whole season. Well, that and goaltending. They have the most power play points in the league and also the most power play opportunities. And that is all helped by being fourth best at converting power plays at a reasonable 25%. Now, I think they're an elite power play. Brandon thinks they're all right and are going to regress from there.
I'm sure Pettersson can draw penalties pretty well, but I don't want to base my fantasy decision-making on a team drawing a lot of penalties. It just feels like a weird way to go after it. And whether 25% is elite or not, or whether Vancouver has an elite unit, is maybe they do. I don't know. Maybe I'm selling Hughes short a little bit, just from what we've seen historically. When Edler was the point there, and they had Miller helps too. So it's there's been enough changes on the top power play that maybe everything's different, and you have to throw all the knowledge we had coming into it out. But regardless, I still wouldn't bet on this increase in opportunities, and that's where I think some of these guys, like Bo Horvat, for example, was a little bit dangerous earlier in the season when he was going off, and a lot of trades were happening around him.
I do think they come down closer probably to like 20% conversion rate at some point, but I'm not completely against 25%. I love that top power play unit. It's just so good, and they move with the puck so well, they click, and yet they can't do anything on 5-on-5. They're the second worst team at 5-on-5 expected goals for, and yet second best at expected goals against. So they've actually been fantastic in front of their goaltenders when it comes to 5-on-5, and yet they can't do anything offensively at 5-on-5. So they're being propped up by this 5-on-5 luck from a shooting percentage perspective and power play success. That's really the two things you can point to, and their goaltenders have been pretty damn good. So the first guy here is Elias Pettersson, 85 to 90 points. It's tough to tell because of how reliant he is on the power play. He already has 16 power play points this season, and he got 22 all of last year. His shot pace is way up, and I absolutely love him. But you are playing a little bit of a dangerous game, because if this power play falls off even a little bit, you are going to feel it on all these players. With this point pace that I'm assuming, 85 to 90, I'm assuming the power play stays at where it is because I think it can. But if it doesn't, then you're looking at probably some kind of big range of 75 to 85, somewhere in there, depending on how much the power play actually slumps. And that's what makes projecting these guys so hard. And Elias Pettersson is super consistent at 61.1%, so you can still trust him night in and night out at the moment. And then there's Brock Besser, who I am so happy to see flourish. I feel like he was one of the most underrated guys going into the draft this year. A lot of people were afraid of injuries or even questioning his abilities, and he's been fantastic. I think he can hit 80 if this power play keeps up, and like I said, I think it can. Everything is super healthy. 5 of 12 of his goals are from the power play, so of course, like I've been saying already a few times now, that's something to watch, and he's been actually more consistent than Elias Pettersson, so a little bit surprising there. And then we have JT Miller, one guy that I am happy to be wrong about. At the beginning of the season, we weren't high on him. We thought, you know what, he's not going to be fantasy relevant. And I would say the same thing again. There was a lot of indicators that showed me, you know what, JT Miller's not going to be that relevant. And he proved me wrong entirely. I would actually be open to thinking of trading for him at this point. I don't know if people are valuing him properly. Maybe like some kind of package of Meyer plus, some name guy who people care about. I don't know, something to get cheap. For example, Timo Meyer and PK Subban. I don't know. That's a little offensive, but if you're in a league where people kind of trade based on name value, maybe that gets it done. I think he's a 70 to 75 point guy by the end of the season. His shooting percentage is fine. His IPP is fine. His on-ice shooting percentage is actually a tad low to be on the Vancouver Canucks, and I would actually like to see that come up a little bit, so that's actually an area where he could get better. His blocks are up, his shots are up, his hits are the same. He's an absolute beast, and on top of that, he has a 63.9 consistency. That is just nuts. And then there's Quinn Hughes on the defense. The kid is a beast. Around 60 points probably is what I'm expecting. Everything is fine. Obviously terrible peripherals, as you know, but I love everything else. Awesome power play time on ice and percentage. His consistency is solid for a rookie and a defenseman especially. I'm like him. I love him rest of the season. Like I said, around 60 points. Bo Horvat is also a guy that I like at around 60 points. Very, very similar to last year. Kind of eerily similar. He's getting more net power play time this year, but he's just not getting in on power play points, and he's on that lethal power play, and he's just not getting many power play points, and it's kind of the Kadri effect, right? You're on a great power play, but just not getting in on it as much. So I'd hold as like a bottom tier center, maybe like your third center. I somewhat like that, but at some point you might want to stream him out just because he doesn't tick as many boxes. He is available in most of my leagues as a free agent, and he gets picked up here and there as a streamer, and I think that's absolutely right. He just doesn't tick as many boxes as you'd like, especially in a peripheral league. In a points league, I absolutely like him as a third center if you need one, and Vancouver has a pretty good amount of off nights, so that makes him pretty valuable. But other than that, that's where he stays at, 60 point range, that Getzlaf range, something in there. And then there's Tanner Pearson, who I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think he might be a 50-point guy, actually. He's been really good. Solid shooting percentage. Shots are up 45%. His on-ice shooting percentage is pretty low, as is his shooting percentage. Obviously, no power play and no peripherals outside of shots. He's a good option in deeper points leagues. In points leagues, he might be a little bit of a sleeper here, where he could end up being a 50-point guy. And his consistency of 44.4 isn't great, but it might be good enough in, like I said, a deeper points league where it's going to be hard to find consistent guys anyways. And then let me remind you of Alex Edler here. Not going to get any points really because of Quinn Hughes, but he gets a ton of shots and a ton of blocks and still hits. And so could just be a peripheral specialist with some kind of point upside if he ever gets a little bit of power play time. But just someone to remember because he just came off of an injury, and so he's probably going to be available on your wire. And if you're lacking in blocks or shots or hits, he might be someone to take a look at that could potentially fix some of that for you. And then the goaltenders. There's Jacob Markstrom and Thatcher Demko. Jacob Markstrom has been fantastic. .583 quality start percentage, a .914 save percentage, and .275 goals against average. He's been good. Nothing spectacular, but he's been as good as expected, pretty much. Doing what the Vancouver Canucks need out of him from a night-in, night-out basis. And he's had a few bad games, and he struggled when his dad passed away, which is completely understandable. But he's been strong for them. He's come up big when they've needed him to, and I really like him down the stretch here for the Vancouver Canucks. I think his wins are going to suffer, but I do think that he will do really well from a save percentage and goals against average perspective. And I think the same for Thatcher Demko, although I think he's a little bit of a better Ilya Samsonov from a save percentage goals against standpoint. but I think that Samsonov gets more wins. Thatcher Demko does have a really good quality start percentage of .667, so he's been fantastic, but I just think that Markstrom's going to get a lot of these starts going down the stretch here. I don't think Markstrom gets traded at the deadline. I think they wait until the end of the season. The Nashville Predators, one of the best defensive teams 5-on-5, and yet the goaltenders are killing them. Only a .902 save percentage at 5-on-5, even with them playing well. They have the third most power play opportunities, but they're 26th at converting them. The story of the Nashville Predators, we thought, we got a lot of questions. Is Duchesne going to change up that power play? Nope, he's not, because Duchesne has never really had that kind of an impact on a team. They shouldn't be this bad. Power play and goaltending are tanking them again. Well, the power play part is again. Goaltender is completely new.
I can't imagine that they're going to continue to be bad rest of the season, but it's been a rough going. Beyond that, I feel like the whole team is pretty much as expected. I don't think anybody is. We mentioned this in the previews before we even started the season that everybody on Nashville, forward-wise, and even a couple of the defensemen, one of the defensemen, are basically like 60-point players. They're like a huge amount of 60-point players.
Now, the first guy to talk about here is someone that Brandon was really high on going into the season, and he was entirely right, and that's Roman Josi. We compared him to Dougie at the beginning of the season, and he does look pretty similar. That looks pretty accurate of a comparison of two guys who were thrown into good opportunities and played very similar styles. When it comes to Roman Josi, I would expect the goals to slow down, and then his points kind of end up in the 65 to 70 range, in my opinion. He's matched last year's power play points already, so that's pretty impressive. And even though, and again, if they get even a little bit better on the power play, he will get a lot more power play points because he's the one being involved in them, and they already get the third most power play opportunities. So any little bit of increase in conversion on the power play helps a guy like Josi a ton. And then there's Ryan Ellis, who has had himself a year. Also likely a 60-plus defenseman, actually. I like him a lot. Brandon thinks he's more of a 55 to 60 guy, but I like him around 60-plus. Things are very in line for him, in my opinion. More power play time than I expected as well. Shots are up 30%. Hits and blocks are up as well, which makes him a great banger option, and he's pretty consistent as well for a defenseman. Love everything about Ryan Ellis. I'm shocked that he's still doing this well. I thought he'd fall off at some point, but nope. He has really turned it on this year.
His on ice is too high at almost 12%, which is high for the Preds. He's getting decent power play time. I'll give him that. I don't know how he's winding up 50%. Which, what are they playing with Josi sometimes? They must be, or are they splitting? No, they must be playing with Josi. So that's interesting. That's an avenue for him to get points. I'll give him that much. So maybe he gets 55. I don't know that I give him 60 plus, but it's possible.
Calle Jarnkrok is one of the best forwards on the team. Shockingly enough, I did not expect that, but wildly unsustainable from many metrics. His shooting percentage is one especially. 16% versus a 12% career average. I'd expect him to be finished closer to like a 13% shooting. His IPP is also wildly inflated, 75% versus 50% last year. Once he comes back down to earth, I think he's more of a 50-point guy with no peripherals. So I don't think he's really worth holding in any league. I think he's just largely a streamer, and I wouldn't pay attention to him long term. Then there's Philip Forsberg, who's been playing on the fourth line recently to the annoyance of everyone that owns him. Hits and blocks are down, but his shots are up, so he's kind of sacrificed those banger peripherals for shots. His shooting percentage, on-ice shooting percentage, and IPP is all in line. 70 to 75 points, in my opinion, for Philip Forsberg this year. Been crazy consistent at about 64% this year. I really like him rest of season, and you might be able to buy low on him while he's been playing on the fourth line if a 70 to 75 point guy with decent shots is worth it to you. Then there's Matt Duchesne. Like I said, the guy everyone thought was going to come in and have a huge impact in Nashville, and he just hasn't. And we're not surprised here. If you've listened to the show in the preseason, we talked about how we weren't high on Matt Duchesne. We thought he wasn't going to have as much of an impact if you looked at his time in Colorado and his time in Ottawa. He's never really had a big impact on the power play, and he hasn't done that here in Nashville. I think he's a 60-point center. His minutes are down and his shots are down. Fine power play deployment, but again, the power play sucks. There's just not much upside. The upside just isn't there. His face-off wins are also down 33% on the year, if that matters to you, and he's just not consistent. So that's how you got to value him. If a 60-ish point center, 55 to 60 point center is worth it to you, then yeah, he's worth it. But otherwise, Matt Duchesne is a streamer option at best. And on top of that, the thing is, and we're about to talk about Ryan Johansson too, but both of these guys, one of the issues is that Nashville has really terrible off nights. And so more likely than not, these are the guys you're going to be benching on heavy slates, and that doesn't help anybody. And so then Ryan Johansson, also similar story, streamer at best, and he has terrible, terrible shots. And he's mostly in line. And so I'd expect somewhere around 55-60, very similar to Duchesne. And his faceoff win pace is also down 14%. So both of them not really doing as much as you'd like. And then there's Victor Arvidsson, who is very surprising to me. He isn't shooting, and he's a volume shooter guy, and his entire fantasy relevance depends on his shooting. At this point, I've got to say, I just don't think he's worth it. I don't even think he's really worth owning. He's a worse Palmieri or worse Atkinson. Without shots and minutes, he's entirely useless. And at this point, I would trade him for virtually almost anything you can get. I just don't see him being good rest of season. On the goaltending side of things, you have Rinne, who's just under league average at the moment. Last year, he excelled at high danger. Now he's average. He's struggling a lot with the mid-danger save percentages, which normally when you see mid-danger or low-danger save percentages being low, or a goaltender struggling with them, it usually has to do just with their mental space or just something stylistically that they're doing wrong. And so here, I would say that this is on Pekka Rinne, and I think he will figure it out. I would have patience with him. But I would handcuff with UC Saros. I do think we'll see more of a Rask-Halak split going forward between these two, because Saros has been great. He does have the same save percentage as Rinne, which points to the defense a little bit, but he has a .533 quality start percentage, which is much better than Rinne's. He's struggling at high danger right now. He's actually below average, so I would expect that to get better, but he's excelling like crazy at low danger, so he's really dialed in when the shots are pretty easy. So I think a split will happen. I think if you have Rinne, handcuffing them is the right thing to do. So volume is going to be your issue. Now, if you have wins or saves as a category, or those are really important to you, then I'd actually think about potentially trading away Rinne, just because with Rinne, you're not going to get as much volume going forward, and the save percentage is even questionable. So I would at least see what the market is for him. The Minnesota Wild is the second team we have, and the only other one that we have nobody to recommend long-term. None of these players that we're going to talk about are long-term players, in our opinion. They have the third best shooting percentage in the league at the moment, fourth highest PDO. There's a lot of luck going on in Minnesota at the moment, and it's benefiting a lot of people, but it won't for long. The first one here is Eric Stahl, who's insanely over-indexed at the moment and on pace for 68 points. I think he's more of a 55 to 60 point player. His shooting percentage and on-ice shooting percentage is extremely high, and it's definitely going to come down. His face-off win pace is also down, and he has a 54% consistency, but once the shooting percentage and on-ice shooting percentage come down, I'd expect that consistency to fall a little bit. Then there's Jason Zucker, I think a 50-point guy. Shots are terrible this year. Shooting percentage is incredibly unsustainable at 20%. Everything else is kind of fine, and the split power play isn't really helping anybody. So again, a streamer.
Dumba is all I can say about Dumba is that what he's doing doesn't make sense. His numbers are, they're not great, but they're better than what he's showing. I think he's a 40 to 45 point guy, and I think his shots, I hope, will come up a bit, but he's not really given much of a reason to hang on to him long term. The hits and blocks are nice. So if you're in a full Bangos league, then I've still hung on to him for a little bit longer. But he's really testing my patience, despite the fact I think that there's something there. What is happening, Dumba? Tell us, please.
Then there's Ryan Suter, who is kind of like the Dylan Strome of defensemen, only worth it in points leagues pretty much, and that's it. There's nothing else. He's good for 50 to 55, I think, with 60-point upside if things go really right. His on-ice shooting percentage is pretty high at 13%. I'd expect that to come down more towards the 10 to 11 range, which is a pretty big deal, given that his IPP is around 50%. So that's the only way I'd take him. I would stream him occasionally in categories leagues, I guess, but he gives you 0 peripherals, nothing else, so it's only if you need points. Then there's Zach Parise, who's inconsistent. He's a streamer. I pivots around 50 points, in my opinion. His shooting percentage at 17% is way too high. His IPP is a little bit low, to be fair, and his minutes and shots are way down. So even though his IPP is low, there's just not as many points to get in on, simply because his minutes and shots are down. Matt Zuccarello is the next one here, another kind of pivot around 50-point guy. Could be less in my opinion. I could absolutely see a 40 to 45 pace here out of him. He's shooting at 20%, a 13% on ice shooting, theme in Minnesota, with good IPP. His minutes are down a ton from last year. I just don't see him having a good year. And I don't even think he's a streamer at this point. I think he is good on the wire, and that's about it. Then on the goaltending side, they're both streamers. Both Stalock and Dubnyk are streamers. I would rather stream in or spot start Dubnyk when needed than Stalock. Stalock is just wildly inconsistent, and I personally don't like touching him. I get burned by Stalock all the time, and so I'd rather spot start Dubnyk when the odds are in his favor. The Calgary Flames broke the simulation. Last year, they were wildly lucky, and we talked about this a lot last year where Giordano, Gaudreau, Monahan, all these guys, Lindholm, were benefiting from very high shooting percentages all around the team, and we're getting more assists than expected. Their on-ice shooting percentages were high, and now this year, they have completely crashed. They have 26th best shooting percentage. That's not very good. So whoever runs the simulation, I don't know who you are, but you broke it. You broke the Calgary Flames. And they're just fine at 5-on-5. They're not exceptional, but they're also not this bad. Their power play is average, as are their opportunities. They actually face the second most shots against in the league, which is pretty surprising. So let's start first with Matthew Tkachuk. Minutes are slightly up. I think he's a 65 to 70 point guy, in my opinion. His shooting percentage is fine on the season. His on-ice shooting percentage is actually a tad low, so there's a little bit of room for improvement there from him. Shots are around the same as last year, and he's still getting really healthy power play time. His hits and blocks are up as well, so that's really good for Peripherals League. So I really like him rest of season. I wouldn't overpay for him, so again, remember that he's a 65 to 70 point guy, and so that's kind of where I'd be targeting in terms of trade or what I'd expect to get back. Then there's Johnny Gaudreau. This is a difficult one. I still think he's a 75 to 80 point guy, but he has a lot of ground to make up to get there, but I think he can do it. And Brandon tends to agree with me. His shooting percentage is ridiculously low, and he's been far better as of late. He's been hitting his normal shooting percentages over the last 30 days. And so if that continues or he goes on a tear for a little bit, he can get right back up to 75 to 80, and that's kind of what I see. His shots are similar to last year, too. He just needs more pucks to go in. One of the places that is hurting him is the power play. He's not getting power play points, as many power play points as he did last year right now, not at the same rate, and that's mostly just because Calgary isn't as good on the power plays they were last year. They were benefiting from really high shooting percentages.
Yeah, I pretty much completely agree with Gaudreau. We talked about how he's like one of the biggest buy low candidates right now. I still believe that. As long as you can deal with him not getting you hits if you're in a hits league.
Sean Monahan is kind of the same story. I think he pivots around 70 points. That's kind of what I see Sean Monahan as. His shooting percentage is really low at 10.9%. His career average, for reference, is 15%. So he should be far, far better in the goals department at the moment than he's doing. His IPP and on-ice shooting percentage is perfect, and he's still getting a lot of power play time. And his face-off win pace is up 33% for those of you that use face-off wins. So I like Sean Monahan the rest of the season. He's someone that definitely might, I would say, people are frustrated with and maybe a buy low candidate if you're struggling at center, which I get a lot of people aren't. But for example, if you're sending Kopi one way and you're getting Monahan another way, but it's like some package deal and you're actually improving in another area, I don't hate that. And then there's Elias Lindholm, who had a fantastic season last year, got 79 points, but I just don't see how or where he gets to that again. I just don't think it's possible. I think he's a 50 to 55 point guy this year, unfortunately. 55 point pace at the moment, and he's shooting at 17% with good on-ice shooting and IPP. I just don't see him getting much better than that unless things drastically change. It's disappointing, and I think at some point you do got to think about, is a streamer spot worth more than him? And that very much might be the case. Then there's Mark Giordano, who is definitely not on a Norris pace this year. That is easy to say. His blocks are up a ton, and his hits are around the same as last year, but his shots are down 15%. His IPP is really low, way too low for the Calgary Flames, even though their shooting percentages are pretty abysmal. So all that being said, I think he's like a 45-point defenseman, unfortunately, which is just not good. But that's what I'd expect from him at the end of the season, is around 45 points. Is that good enough for you to hold? I don't know. That's up to you. I like his floor because of his hits and blocks for the league that I'm in, but if you're in a points-only league, 45 may not be good enough for you, and it might be better to just stream someone in. On the goaltending side of things, there's David Riddick, who has a .536 quality start percentage, .913 save percentage, and a .277 goals against average. I'm not extremely high on him. I think he's kind of like a Jacob Markstrom with more wins. That's kind of how I view him. I view him as a Jacob Markstrom more wins, kind of an average goaltender with a very, very hard job, who will be fine for you. He's a good second goalie. If he's your first goalie, I'd probably try to kind of upgrade the position a little bit, because I wouldn't trust a goaltender who faces the second most shots in the league. That's a dangerous game to play. So when it comes to David Rittich, I like him, but I wouldn't be extremely high on him. By rostering 3 forwards. Yep, did you know that? Only 3 forwards. That's all they roster. That's it. Just 3. At least that's how it feels, especially from a fantasy perspective. They're the 24th worst team in Corsi for percentage. Goaltending is killing them 5-on-5. They have the 3rd most goals against. Yeah, it's kind of brutal. They're all right. The average shooting percentage, it's the McDavid and Draisaitl show here, folks, and that's about it. They've got the 2nd best power play. That's also another thing that's bolstering them up. 29.82% conversion rate. 10th most opportunities, and 2nd most overall power play points. 3rd most shots against from a goaltending perspective. And of course, this all starts with Connor McDavid, who, this is kind of an insane stat. So last year, he got 0.42 power play points per game. So that's the rate that he got awarded power play points per game. This year, he's at 0.7 power play points per game, which is insane. When we used to talk about Connor McDavid, Brandon and I would always say there's 2 kind of levers that we can pull to make McDavid even better. And that's shots and power play points. And his shots got better last year, and this year his power play points are taking off. So if that can remain high, man, Connor McDavid, the moon is his ceiling. Although I have him more at a 120-point guy this year. That's what I think he gets. His shooting percentage is fine. Shots are the same. On-ice shooting percentage is a tad high, but not insane given that it's Connor McDavid. Shooting percentage shooting at 22% on the power play versus 15% last year, so that's something to watch. I'm curious to see if that stays high or comes down. His face-off win pace is down 12%, unfortunately, and he's at 71% consistency, which ain't too shabby. Then there's Leon Draisaitl, who I think is like a 105-point floor guy. That's kind of what he feels like to me. His shooting percentage is fine. Minutes are good. IPP is good. On-ice shooting percentage is just slightly high. But that only happens when he plays with McDavid, and they've spent a lot of time together this year. It's funny, when they play together, their on-ice shooting percentage jumps up to around 13 to 14%. When they're not together, that drops down to 10 to 11%, just because they both make each other so much better. I so wish they had a deeper team so that they could play together more often. As far as Draisaitl's shots are up 12%, his face-off win pace is down 12%, and shockingly, he actually is far more consistent than McDavid. McDavid, remember, is 71.1% consistency. Leon Draisaitl is an 81.6% consistency, which is nuts. And then the complement to that line for the most part of the season was Zach Kassian. So his minutes are up 12%. I think he's around a 50-point guy. Shooting percentage is insane at 21%. Of course, you can't discount that he plays with McDavid, but 21% is too high. If you were telling me 15 to 17, fine. I can kind of believe that. His shots are up, which is awesome to see, and his hits are up 17%. And if you count PIMs, those are up 25%, making him a super good asset. And actually, I think a long-term asset in peripherals leagues, especially if you count PIMs. Then there's James Neal, who I couldn't be lower on James Neal if I tried for the rest of the season. I think he's a 40 to 45 point guy. Hits are up 70%, but I think his rest of season pace is going to be extremely slow. He relied on an insane shooting percentage to start the season, and he's gotten nowhere near that since. So I just don't see how he's going to get back to those levels of the beginning of the season. Then there's Oscar Klefbom. And the story of the season for him is that he has 85% more blocks than last year. So in a blocks league, he's almost a must-own. I hate those words, but in a blocks league, he can win you a week almost. He's been insane from a blocks perspective. 20% more PIMs, too, if you count PIMs in the league. Hits are up a ton, or a tad, rather. I said ton when I meant tad. 50 to 55-point guy, in my opinion. Whereas if McDavid and Draisaitl play a lot of time together, I could see that going up to 60 points, 55 to 60 points, if they play together, because he actually gets a lot of benefit when Draisaitl and McDavid play together, because he gets a lot of 5-on-5 time and power play time, and if McDavid and Draisaitl are playing together, he gets a lot of exposure to that and gets in on those points, so I would like to see that. And one of the big issues with Oscar Klefbom that makes him very difficult to own is his consistency. He's a 34.2% consistency player. That's awful. That is so low. It makes me hate owning him sometimes. because you can't rely on points from him. You can rely on the blocks, but the points you just can't rely on him. So he's a specialist at the moment. RNH, very dependent on line. He just doesn't drive his own offense. I think 50 to 55 is kind of where he finds himself, unless he finds time on Draisaitl or McDavid's wing for a consistent amount of time, not just for a little bit, but for a long time. That's kind of what I would want to see from RNH, is if he can do that, then I'd put him a little higher. His shots are down. His IPP is low. It's down 38%, so that's an area that he can improve in quite a bit. His power play percentage is still really high, but he kind of plays that Kadri/Horvat role of just on it, but not really getting much out of it. And lowish face-off wins, but they are up a little bit, if that matters. And he's also extremely inconsistent at 37.5%, so he's a terrible streamer option even. It's kind of hard to recommend keeping RNH unless you have some hope that he's going to play on McDavid or Draisaitl's wing for a long time. And then Darnell Nurse, ever since the power play got taken away from him, he's been awful. 35 to 40 points, in my opinion. Shots are the same as last year. Hits pace is the same. Blocks pace is actually down. But that's an issue because of time on ice and deployment. If the time on ice were higher, he'd get more blocks and he'd get more hits. That's just matter of fact. And then lastly, in the net, there's Mikko Koskinen. Very consistent goaltender so far. It's been surprising. Not great, but not bad. He has a very difficult job, though, in Edmonton. Like I said, they allow a ton of shots against, so it's not an easy job. So you're gambling a little bit by picking up Mikko Koskinen. He's outperforming expected at high danger and mid-danger save percentages, so I'd expect those to come down a little bit by season's end. But he's a good goaltender. I think, again, kind of similar to Riddick. I think he's a really good second goaltender. I wouldn't run him as my first goaltender, though. The Winnipeg Jets, or should I call them the Winnipeg Hellebucks, because that's the only reason they're doing anything right now. 5th most expected goals against, but they actually have the 5th best save percentage. They're pretty insane, and that's because of Hellebuck. They have an average power play percentage, conversion rate, and they get the 25th most power play opportunities. Not good enough. But there's a reason for that. It's because they are the worst penalty kill team in the league, and it hurts them because if you don't take penalties, you're not going to get power plays. It's stupid that that's how the NHL works. It shouldn't work like that. I don't know why people aren't more up in arms about that. But that's a fact, and it sucks. And so if they can't take penalty kills because their penalty kill is awful, they're not going to get as many power play opportunities.
Before we get into players, there's one more thing I wanted to mention about the team. There's one thing I got to mention about the team. Well, two, but they're related. They have the worst high danger Corsi for percent in the league. Now, I'm sure a lot of people are going, well, a percent, it could be low volume. They could just have, not a lot for and, a decent little bit more against. But, yeah. What? Well, anyway, but they actually have the 3rd worst high danger Corsi against per game, behind only the New York Rangers and Chicago, which is pretty not good company to keep. So not only are they letting up just about the worst attempts against that they could, they also aren't responding with their own. So just it pushes even further this rhetoric that first of all, Hellebuck should be in Vezina. He should be the Vezina favorite. I know Kemper's been amazing, but if you were to look at the details of what's going on with Hellebuck and what he's facing, it's not the same. It's not apples to apples anymore. And it just further pushes this notion that Hellebuck is carrying this team, carrying them. They probably shouldn't be in the playoffs or a playoff bound team at the moment.
Now, the first player to talk about here is Mark Scheifele, who is virtually the exact same player as last year. Exactly the same. Same point projection, same shot pace, same IPP, on-ice shooting percentage, power play shooting percentage. The only thing down is face-off wins at 17%. So what you got to do to evaluate Mark Scheifele is go take a look at your rankings from last year, see where Scheifele ended, and that's probably where Scheifele will end this year, and see if that is worth it for you. If that's worth it for you, then cool. Then there's Patrick Laine, who was a huge, huge surprise for the year. Did not expect this from him. I think he's a 75 to 80 point guy. He has really turned it around. And one of the places that he's turned around is his IPP. It's up 31%, and I buy it. It's good to see him get more points. And I think it's because he's been better on both ends of the ice, and he's been involved more in the offense. Last year, remember that there was a lot of talk about he's being lazy, he's not as involved in the offense, and that kind of thing. And this year, he's really turned that around. And so I think that the increase in IPP actually makes sense for him this year. His shooting percentage and shots are actually in line with last year, which some may argue the shooting percentage is too low. But I would argue, regardless, it's good either way. Either it's really sustainable and now it's not this crazy high number that you're like, oh, can he actually keep that? Or that's too low and he's at some point going to turn it on. So either way, it's good for him, I think. So 75 to 80 is kind of where I see him at. Low power play shooting percentage, so that's another area he can improve in a little bit to get him to that 75 to 80. And 64.7% consistency. Last year, he was like a 40% consistency guy. That's huge. It's a massive change. That makes him a must own. That takes him from, oh my God, I can't stand owning him, to, wow, he's crushing it every single night. So I love what I've seen out of Patrik Laine this year, and he's an absolute steal. Kyle Connor is the next one to talk about here. Minutes are up from last year. Power play percentage is still really high for him. Shots are also way up, 25%, which is awesome, especially from a guy who can shoot the puck and score a lot. That's good to see from Kyle Connor. Shooting percentage is actually a little bit low, which could be attributed to more shots in general going on net, but you may want to see that go up a little bit. So that's an area that he can increase. I think 70 is a safe bet to make with Kyle Connor. He's also really consistent at 61%. And I like what he's doing. I wouldn't try to sell high or anything like that. I love what Kyle Connor is doing. Then there's Blake Wheeler, who, if you bought low on him, you're kind of loving what's happening recently. He's finally finding his form in the past 30 days and is currently on a 101 point pace over those last 30 days. Shots are also back to normal mostly. His on-ice shooting percentage on the season is a tad low, so he can actually get better. High power play percentage again. Hits and blocks are up. Face-off win pace is through the roof because he's been playing as a center. We thought that might be a little bit scary because it might lead to the Giroux effect, where when you play center, you suck a little bit more. But that hasn't happened with him. He's a hard player to nail down because of all the deployment stuff that's been going on, but I think he finishes at around 80 or so. So that's about 54 points the rest of the season. And he has right now a 53% consistency, but I think that will get better as the season goes on. That's not who Blake Wheeler is normally very, very consistent. So I think he gets significantly better down the stretch here. Nikolai Ehlers' shots, minutes, and power play percentage are up from last year, so he's become a better player. He's also become more consistent, which is nice to see. I think he's a 60 to 65 point player with a lot of shots. A tad over-indexed IPP, but not by a ton. I still like him. He's kind of a bench forward for me in my 12-person keeper league. He's not super fantastic, but he's good enough that on any night I still want to play him. He doesn't tick many boxes. That's the only thing. He's a shots and points guy. That's it. That's who he is. And I'll take that, honestly. Sometimes those guys are hard to find, especially ones that are consistent like Ehlers. Josh Morrissey has been dropped a lot as of late, but in points leagues, I'd argue he's actually kind of solid. 52.9% consistency, which is fine for a defenseman. And I think he gets like 50 to 55 points with a 60-point ceiling if he can get top power play, which, again, right now I think it's Pionk's to lose. But there is that ceiling there. Awful shots, no improvement in power play percentage recently, but higher offensive zone starts as of late, so he has been getting more offensive zone time. Then there's Neil Pionk, who is the actual top power play QB at the moment. His minutes are up 10% on the season, and points are way higher. Probably around 60 if he can keep the high 5v5 deployment and power play minutes. If he can keep those two, I can see him getting 60 pretty easily. Shots are higher than last year, but not great still. His on-ice shooting percentage on the season is actually a little bit low. I'd like it higher. And 50% consistency, which is good for a defenseman. And hits pace is up, blocks are down, so at least you get some peripherals there. He's not exactly as multi-cat as he was last year because of the blocks going down, but he'll get you hits, which in standard leagues is worth more than blocks anyways, because standard doesn't count blocks. So I really like Pionk rest of season. I'd actually think about potentially targeting him in a trade too, because I think you could get him really, really cheap. Just because nobody really thinks that highly of Pionk. And you could be getting a 60-point D-man out of him, and you might only need to give up like a 40-point D-man, right? Like someone who, I'm trying to think of a good name here of who you could give, but just think about like a 40-point defenseman, right? That has name value that someone might think is low, but you're not that high on, that kind of thing. And you just gamble a little bit. Then there's Connor Hellebuck, who in my eyes is the Vezina favorite this year. When he finished second in Vezina voting a few years ago, he had exactly these numbers pretty much. He was playing exactly like he is now. And given how the team is playing in front of him in the context, I think he has the hardest job and deserves the Vezina the most at the moment, at least. He has a 9.24 at the moment, but I think he's more of a 9.20 goaltender by season's end. He's normally average at high danger save percentage, and he's currently outperforming it. So I think that comes down a little bit. 6.67 quality start percentage. He's a beast, and I wouldn't touch Brossoit. Brossoit has been absolute garbage, and so I can only see Hellebuck getting a lion's share of starts like he already has been for the rest of the season. The Vegas Golden Knights continue to be good. 8th best Corsi for percentage, but they have the 20th worst 5-on-5 save percentage. I wouldn't look into it too much, though, because they're right in line with the expected goals against. So the goaltenders are kind of performing as expected. They have the 7th best power play at 22.12%, and they're 12th in opportunities. 5th most shots against, but they're 1st in shots for. But that doesn't really matter for much because they're 23rd in shooting percentage. And so they can't really get anything in the net. It's only a few players that are doing that. And the one that's doing it the most is Max Pacioretty, who has been a monster. What's crazy is his shooting percentage is actually lower than last year, but his shots on goal are higher by 37%. So that can explain away a little bit of the lower shooting percentage, but still, I expected a little bit higher. His on-ice shooting percentage has increased 33% from last year, and that actually makes sense because he has better line mates. And minutes are similar, but his points per 60 have exploded. Again, similar because of line mates. Shooting way more on the power play than last year, which you love to see because his power play time on ice has also increased. He already has more power play points than last year, so make no mistake. Max Pacioretty is an elite fantasy player this year and may be worth targeting a trade to see how cheap you can get him. I think he's a 75 to point per game player, somewhere in there. 63% consistency. I love Max Pacioretty, and there's still room to improve because the team is shooting at a low shooting percentage. And so there's actually room for him to get better, and that's why I put him at 75 to 82. Somewhere in there. I think he can hit point per game. I see a path to that.
I'm pretty sure when I drafted him in one of our leagues, I was like, I'm going to draft one of the most underrated players, I think, for the season, and it was Pacioretty. I actually, I'll make this short, but in our Dynasty League, I was locked up at left wing. I had too many left wings. I wanted to move one, and Pacioretty made the most sense to me, and I couldn't even knock on the door. The door was a moving target. Swinging and missing. People wouldn't even hear it. So I was stuck with him, and that worked out pretty well. I am still a little bit in lock on my left wing, but what can you do? I'll take it if it's going to be what Patches is given this season. I actually think that the idea of him leading the team in points and ending close to point per game is very plausible with what he's doing.
And then there's Mark Stone on his line. Everything is awesome. Mark Stone is awesome. You know we love Mark Stone. Everyone loves Mark Stone. 70 to 75 points in my opinion. Shots are the same, but more are coming on the power play, which is good. IPP is a touch high at 77%. That probably will come down a little bit, but his on-ice shooting percentage is low. So if that comes up and his IPP drops a little bit, kind of balances out. And also very consistent. Then there's William Karlsson, who I think people need to recalibrate. I don't think he's ever going to reach or get close to that year where he had 21% shooting or whatever it was. I think this is the William Karlsson that is real. This 65 point, same as last year, William Karlsson. What you see is kind of what you get. Shots are the same. IPP is the same. Shooting percentage is fine. Power play time is down, which isn't great, but not awful because he didn't really get that much power play time last year. Face-off win pace, hits, and blocks are all up, and he's actually really consistent at 58%. He's one of my favorite kind of in that 60-point range, 60 to 70-point range centers. He's probably one of my favorite ones simply because he ticks a lot of boxes and he's incredibly consistent.
That's where I put him too. So I think what's interesting about Wild Bill is we saw this insane ridiculous year where he put up whatever 27% shooting, whatever it was. People lost their minds. And then we saw this ridiculous, insane year where he underperformed and people lost their minds. And now we're seeing, I think, what is going to be his norm. I think 65 points is pretty much what we should be expecting from him. And he gives you bad peripherals. So he reminds me sort of David Krejci, I think, is who comes to mind a lot when I think of William Karlsson, except William Karlsson does get a little bit more shots than Krejci does.
Then there's Riley Smith, 55 to 60 points, high shooting percentage at 14%, but not insane. That should come down a little bit, but not terribly off. Assists are fine, which is IPP and on-ice shooting percentage largely. His power play percentage is down on the year, which isn't good, and that's kind of where that reduction in points comes from. Shots are up, but that's the only peripherals he has. He doesn't have much else. What's surprising is his consistency. It's 58%, which is really, really good. And again, 55 to 60 points, in my opinion, for Riley Smith. Most likely, he's going to be a streamer at many points in the year. But he's a really, really good streamer, or he's just a good bench option to have on your bench and kind of pop in whenever. I would say he's more of a streamer option than a bench person, just because Vegas doesn't have that great of off nights. And so I would keep him more as a streamer and always keep an eye on him whenever he gets hot or whenever you can play him, but I wouldn't give him a super long leash, if that makes sense.
I put 60-65, and I also put Riley Smith and Nikolai Ehlers are the same person. They're both shot volume-ish, point, like decent. They're both the guys that wind up on your team and you wonder what you're supposed to do with them. Because they're just above, like they're far enough above waiver level that like the idea of them becoming a streamer is a tough pill to swallow. But because they don't give you power play points and, there's never going to be much power play point upside for either one of them. It makes them, they do just enough to be like the worst forward on your team.
Then there's Jonathan Marchessault, who has been wildly, I think, disappointing to most. Shots are slightly up, which is cool. He's a big shooter. Shooting percentage is fine. His on-ice shooting percentage is what's hurting him. It's way too low at 7.5%. His power play is what's really bad. It's down 21%. That's not something you want to see from a guy like Jonathan Marchessault. His hits are up 52% at least, so helps in the peripheral department. But again, 60 to 65 point guy, just not what you expected out of him. 60.5% consistency, so at least he gets you a lot of points, or gets you consistent points. But man, 60 to 65 points is not what people expected when they were drafting Jonathan Marchessault this year. I think a lot of people expected really big things out of him, and he just has not delivered.
Yeah, I put him a little lower actually. I put 55 to 60. But the funny thing, he's the guy that if I was in a hat trick league, I would target Marchessault. He always gets one. I think the only thing that like made me think maybe he'll get a little bit more than 60 is his on ice shooting is pretty low. But so I think like his ceiling is probably 70-ish, but he's being held back on the power play as well. So Patches is essentially a better Marchessault for the purposes of the power play. So there's no real reason to play them together. And why would you play Marchessault over Patches at this point?
Shea Theodore, around 50 points is the pivot, I think, for him. Just around 50. His shots are up a bit on the season. Shooting percentage is a tad low. IPP is super low at 38% versus last year's 50%. And last year, his on-ice shooting percentage was fine, and this year it's kind of continuing at the same rate. His power play percentage is still really high. He's getting a ton of power play time still, so those power play points could still come. It's the consistency that is really alarming. It's only 40%. So it's hard to recommend a guy when they're getting 40% consistency. It doesn't matter who they are. That is really frustrating. The good thing is that Shea Theodore at least has the power play point upside. But again, he's a defenseman that I just would not have a very long leash for. You can with that kind of consistency, you can probably find other people. You can probably make up Shea Theodore's points by streaming in and out. And get the same points at the end of the day, but actually have them help you week to week.
So I think rest of the season he'll be on basically what I put him to start the season at, like a 50-point pace. So considering he started so slow, I think he's going to wind up, 40 to 45, maybe 45, let's say, I hope. Yeah. The thing is, Vegas is clearly ready to put their weight behind Theodore regardless. They've been giving him 70% or so on the power play forever, regardless if he's been doing well or not. And now we're recently seeing this kind of lift. He's getting some points finally. And he's as good a bet as you can get on that team for fantasy relevance as far as points go. I'm hoping that this season is it's always, this is the first day of the rest of the season, so you can kind of take that as it is. But as far as the actual number at the end of the season, maybe a little bit too far gone to recover it into something that looks good for the beginning of next season. But it's really making me think that because of that, we're going to see Theodore be a cheap option going into next year.
And then there's Nate Schmidt, who honestly is not really that worth talking about, but we get a lot of questions about him, so I figured I'd bring him up. He's a 30 to 40 point guy, very dependent on deployment. He's barely a streamer. I don't even think he's a streamer, but I'd say barely because some deep leagues he might be worth it. No power play time. Shots are bad. IPP is a tad high for him. On-ice shooting percentage is fine, I guess. Blocks are up 20%, but his hits are down. So for standard leagues especially, not as worth it. And his consistency is garbage at 35%. I mean, you can't rely on him for points at all, so you're really only relying on him for blocks and his mediocre shots. They're really just not worth it. And then there's Reeves and Carrier, who a lot of people use to stream for hits. And minutes are down for both, but what's interesting is that Carrier's hits are actually down 45% on the season, whereas Reeves has seen his hits jump 22%. So at the moment, if you needed to choose one week to week on who to stream, I'd actually choose Reeves right now to stream for hits over Carrier, which is pretty surprising because last year Carrier was just such a monster at hits, but with that reduction of 45%, I actually like Reeves much more week to week now than William Carrier. And then Marc-Andre Fleury in net, exactly the same save percentage as last year, but the composition of where it's coming from is a little bit different. Last year, he was excellent at mid-danger save percentages, but he got a little bit worse at that. This year, he's excelling at high-danger saves, but he's still outperforming, nonetheless, the average in mid-danger and low-danger, so I wouldn't worry too much. He's solid as hell. 5.42 quality start percentage. I like him quite a bit. And then as far as Subban goes as his backup, I like him a lot as a spot start for wins, but I don't like him for save percentage and goals against average. I would trust him for wins, not for save percentage and goals against, and that's about it. The Arizona Coyotes are virtually New York Islanders West. That's pretty much how it works. They are 27th in shooting percentage, but 3rd in save percentage. Yep. Sounds like the New York Islanders. They're expected to be 9th worst in goals against, yet they're 7th best. Above average in power play opportunities and converting them. But the real story of the season is Darcy Kemper and the goaltending here. 7.60 quality start percentage, 9.29 save percentage, 2.17 goals against average, and a beautiful 15 goals saved above average, which is actually higher than Hellebuck. He's crushing in low danger save percentage at 98.3, which is unbelievable. To me, that just speaks volumes about him just being dialed in and in the zone and stopping exactly what he should. One thing that's really interesting about both him and Ronta is that the average goal distance, so how close is a goal usually scored, has actually creeped up quite a bit. It's now 18 feet from the net. What that tells you is teams know they can't score easy goals on Darcy Kemper. They know they need to work the puck into the dangerous areas of the ice to score on him. And so a lot of the goals are only happening from close up. And the same thing has happened to Antti Raanta. And so teams seem to know that. So maybe that affects things later on and changes the composition of his save percentage. But for now, I mean, it doesn't really matter. He's crushing it. And Antti Raanta has also been exceptional. Don't count him out. Excelling at low danger and mid danger save percentages, actually sucking at high danger a lot, which is kind of surprising. And I'd expect that to come up at least to average. Same story as Kemper with the average goal distance. So that's just something to watch that's really interesting from a real life hockey perspective. Nick Schmaltz is actually leading the team in points, which I'm not surprised by, but I don't think it ends like that. His shot pace is down from last year. Shooting percentage is finally in line after the insanity that was going on. On-ice shooting percentage is fine, but IPP is high at 75%. I'd give him 70% for better line mates, but even that's a stretch. I don't see his IPP being that high. I think 65 or 60 is more in line for him. His power play time is completely gone. Face-off wins are down. He's a points-only option. He's only like 50 to 55 points at that.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I'm just glad. Like this, I didn't want him to turn into a Will Butcher thing where people are just flaming us all season because he keeps doing well. But he did calm down a bit. Although over the last couple of weeks he's been pretty good again. But yeah, buoyed by that insane on-ice shooting percentage. So he's going to go right back out once that cools off.
Then there's Clayton Keller. Minutes are down. Shots are up 23% though, and shooting percentage is fine. So probably see an increase in goals this season. IPP is high, 86%. I'd expect that closer to 70, and that's a pretty big drop off. And for that reason, I see him as more of a 55 to 60 point player. I believe right now he's more on like a 65 point pace, but I think because of that high IPP, I think you're going to see that dip quite a bit.
Yeah, I actually put him right at 55, basically the same as last season. Well, actually, it's a little higher than last season, but the biggest thing I think with Keller is he's now become the third best offensive forward on the team. So that happened quickly. But so yeah, now he's got a couple looming presences in front of him, so to speak.
Then you have Taylor Hall. We've previously talked about him, but I expect him 75 to 80. There is a floor of 70 because of the style that Arizona plays. Their offense is just not very conducive to a lot of goals or a lot of points. They tend to have a low shooting percentage, rely on defense and goaltending type of style, similar to the New York Islanders, and brings down offensive players. Phil Kessel is a perfect example of that. And this might be a hot take, but I think he's like a 50-point guy. I think he pivots around there like 50 to 55, I guess. He should have such a short leash with Hall. I don't care that Hall is there. It's a system thing. That's why I'm not high on Phil Kessel. It's not because he's bad or anything. It's the system. Arizona is just not conducive to guys like Phil Kessel. His shooting percentage has regressed to Arizona numbers. Shots are down 8%. His IPP is fine. On-ice shooting percentage is a touch low, but he got 11% on-ice shooting percentage last year. And he himself had a much better shooting percentage, but that was on an offensive Pittsburgh team. That's not going to happen on Arizona. His power play percentage is still high, but in my opinion, he's in drop territory. Sure, let's see what happens with Taylor Hall for a bit. Maybe he turns this around and things change, but I'm personally, if I had him, I would give him a very short leash.
Ooh, I definitely have him higher than that. I know he's been awful, but we'll see. I don't know. Because we're talking about, like, instead of a pace, we're talking about what's going to happen at the end of the season. I mean, I think he's going to be at a 60 to 65 point pace, but where's that going to bring him? So if we say he gets 65, that'll put him at 55-ish by the end of the season. So I'll say 55.
Christian Dvorak is in that same camp where he's hard to project right now, at least because of Hall. You don't know how exactly Dvorak is going to get used or if he's going to get that deployment very long term. He's still only playing like 14 to 15 minutes a game since Hall came. So I guess around 55 points for Dvorak end of season. That's kind of where I'm expecting him as an owner of Dvorak. I think his expected goals are right in line at the moment, so his shooting percentage is fine. His power play percentage has gotten a lot better as of late now that he's on top power play. No shots, but he has really good line mates, obviously. So what you're looking at and banking on is assists. That's what you're hoping he gets. His face-off win pace is also up 14%, if that matters to you. So Dvorak is a really good option at the moment, but again, similar to Phil Kessel, I'd give him a very short leash. Carl Soderberg is a super defensive player, gets most of his starts in the defensive zone, and I have him pinned for about a 50-point guy, somewhere around there. His shots are down 33% on the season, which is not good. Inflated shooting percentage of 18%, similar to what Nick Schmaltz did at one point. His IPP and on-ice shooting percentage is fine, but his power play time is completely gone. 44% shooting on the power play, too, is going to bring up your shooting percentage. So that's where a lot of that inflated shooting percentage is coming from, is from this inflated power play shooting percentage. And he doesn't shoot very much, so any goal really makes a dent in that shooting percentage. And his face-off win pace is down 30%. So at this point, Soderberg is at best a streamer, and even then, I don't think he's even worth that. Oliver Ekman-Larsson on the defense, I don't think he leads the Arizona defense in points this year, actually. I think he finishes around 40 with mediocre peripherals. Close to being droppable like Kessel. His IPP is insanely low, to be fair, at 30%. It was 51% last year. His shots are around the same, though. I just think that there's probably better on the wire, and you can probably do more than what Oliver Ekman-Larsson is giving you, whether it's peripheral perspective or a point perspective. Oliver Ekman-Larsson is just not really worth it. And Jacob Chychrun is in the same boat. He's also a streamer, around 40 points, decent hits, blocks, and shots, but nothing exceptional, nothing worth holding on to. And his power play time is completely gone now that Hall is here. I just don't see a reason to hold Jacob Chychrun long term. Alex Goligoski is actually the guy I think will lead the team in points from a defenseman perspective. 45 to 50 for him, I think, end of season is what we're looking at. Good shooting percentage. He has 20% more shots on the season. His on-ice shooting percentage is 10.3, which is pretty good for Arizona, actually. And his hits are up 45%, blocks are around the same, and PIMs are up 2. Obviously no power play, but I mean, at least if you're in a bangers league, those points and peripherals and shots actually make him worth owning. And so right now I'd say I'd give him a short leash so that when he cools down, like, I would dump. But for now, he's definitely a good long-term, medium to long-term option. The Dallas Stars are quickly becoming the Arizona Coyotes of the West. I guess they... Well, about that. I guess they are the West. Anyways, they are an average 5-on-5 team offensively, and where they're getting it done is the save percentage. They have the top save percentage in the league from a team perspective at all strengths. 22nd best power play and 26th in opportunities and 25th in shooting percentage. Goaltending is king here. Defense and goaltending is king. And that hurts guys like Tyler Seguin, who I think is around a 70.5 point guy this year, which is really disappointing. Shooting percentage is low at 7.8%. But as I'll say with every single Dallas player here, Dallas as a whole has a low shooting percentage. And so this might be a thing like Arizona and the Islanders, and they now have a defensive coach where everyone's shooting percentage gets a little bit deflated. And then we might be seeing that with Tyler Seguin, where yes, he's a career guy at 10%, but maybe on this new Dallas team, he's an 8.5 to 9% guy. That's just who he is. On top of that, his shots are down 15%. On-ice shooting percentage is really low, but that is also tied, like I was saying, to everyone being deflated in shooting percentage. That's kind of the problem. Is IPP is solid, but is the on-ice shooting percentage going to come up? I don't know. I don't think so, given the system that they play now. Power play is down to 50% because they're doing this stupid split thing, and it's hurting every single offensive Dallas player. His power play shooting percentage is also really low. That I expect to come up. His hits are up, but face-off wins are down 10% due to time on ice, pretty much. Like if he were to get more time on ice, you would see these face-off wins come up and on top of some of his other peripherals. Then there's Alexander Radulov. 65 points in my opinion is the pivot point. Shots are down 13%. A theme in Dallas. Everyone has lower shots. It's just how it works, pretty much. Shooting percentage is a touch low, but again, contextually for Dallas, it's not that low. On-ice shooting percentage and IPP, fine, given team context. He's also down to 50% power play, and his blocks are down. So he's good for points at this point. That's kind of what I'd say. He has good peripherals, not fantastic anymore. I would... but 65 points is still worth owning, especially in a Bangers league. He ticks off a lot of boxes. I wouldn't be looking to drop in or anything like that anytime soon. Miro Heiskanen is a tough one because he's so reliant on power play. He could go either way. So I'd say with no top power play, he's a 35 to 40 point guy. With top power play, he's a 40 to 45 point guy. So that's what to watch. And who knows? He probably ends somewhere in the middle there just because he ends up right around like 40, right? Because sometimes he gets top power play, sometimes he doesn't. His shot pace is up 16%, his minutes are up, his IPP is up, and his block pace is up. So he's actually pretty worth it. I don't think he's worth really a long-term option at this point. I think he's more of a streamer. But I think that might be the case for pretty much all of Dallas defensemen, even Klingberg maybe at this point, which we'll talk about in a second. But first, let's talk about Jamie Benn. Pivot around 45 points. How about that? Yep. Now, cue all the angry people coming into the chat talking about Jamie Benn. I think he pivots around 45 points. IPP and on-ice shooting percentage isn't so bad that it would make that much of a difference, but it could increase a little bit. Obviously, the shooting percentage is down, like all of Dallas. Face-off win pace is up 43%, and his hits are up 34%. But man, the days of Jamie Benn being just supremely relevant are gone in terms of fantasy. I just don't see where he's going to make this up. I mean, if Tyler Seguin can't even make it up, like how are we expecting Jamie Benn, who's been struggling now for 2 years, to make this up? I just don't. I think we've just got to come to the realization of who Jamie Benn is. And in a Bangers league, he's worth it, but just you've got to recalibrate and see him as a 45-point, 50-point guy who's going to get you really good peripherals, and that's it.
Man, I'm looking at him now. Like the only redeeming qualities is his peripherals. Like his shots are fine enough. But his hits are great. His hits are really good. So, I mean, that makes him worth hanging on to. But I don't know, 50 points? Like, I want to give him the benefit of the doubt and say he finishes at a 60-point pace. But I'm just hoping that some, wisp of what was going on a couple of years ago finds its way into the rest of the season for him. You could point at his low IPP a little bit, but that's about it.
Roope Hintz is droppable. 40 to 45 points, insanely high shooting percentage right now of 22% versus 9%. His IPP and on-ice shooting percentage are fine. Shots are up, but he still doesn't shoot very much, and so it doesn't really matter, and he's not getting any power play time. So for Roope Hintz, like he's not even a streamer at this point. I would just full-on drop and hope for the best next year, pretty much. Especially if you're in a dynasty or something like that, just hope for the best next year and see what happens. I wouldn't be moving him or anything, because I still think they're high on him, but I would be lower on him if this is a whole new system thing where they become super defensive. Joe Pavelski is another one that, man, Dallas is going to make people angry. Joe Pavelski, I put him around 40 points. He's done, folks. This is who he is. Without that ridiculous shooting percentage in San Jose and the insane amount of power play time, this is it. This is who he is. His shooting percentage is literally in line with his career average. This is who he is. And his shots are down 24%. So bring down his shooting percentage a ton. Bring down his shots a ton. Yeah, his points are going to come down a ton compared to last year. His IPP is fine. On-ice shooting percentage is fine contextually. Power play shooting percentage is fine. Face-off win pace is down. Hits are down. Blocks are down. He's done. That's it. He's not worth holding. I keep seeing people trade for him. Stop trading for him. He's not worth it. Without insane shooting percentage, which now he's on a defensive team that has a low shooting percentage, he's not worth it. That's it. I'm sorry, folks, but the days of Joe Pavelski being super consistent and fantasy relevant are gonzo, as far as I'm concerned. John Klingberg, I still think he can be a 55-point defenseman if he keeps top power play. Otherwise, he could be as low as 45. Shots are down 15%. On-ice shooting percentage is really low, even for Dallas standards. It's 7.43%, and blocks are up. So, if he starts to lose top power play, I'm not against dropping him, especially in shallower leagues, and just streaming in good point getters here and there, whenever. But, man, he has been disappointing, and really it all just comes down to deployment because he's a points guy, first and foremost. Esa Lindell, I'm just here to tell you he's not worth it at all anymore. Everything is down. Just drop. There's no point in holding Esa Lindell. On the goaltender side, Ben Bishop is a top 3 fantasy goaltender, and I have no qualm saying that. I'm surprised by it. He somehow got even better at mid-danger and a touch worse at high danger, but he's still just insane at high danger saves. He's a 920, 925 goaltender, in my opinion, and that's probably who he is right now. The question is, can he stay healthy? And the other thing with him is volume. Like, if you care about volume, that's kind of the issue with Ben Bishop, especially with Anton Khudobin playing as well as he is. He's one of the best spot start options in the game at the moment. 12.85 record, 5.38 or 5.83 quality start percentage, 9.28 save percentage, 2.31 goals against average. I'd argue he's actually a little bit more sustainable than Bishop just because he's doing better at the low danger area of saves. But Ben Bishop did this last year too, so he's sustainable. Again, the big question comes to how much does volume matter to you? How much do saves matter to you? How much do starts matter to you? And how much do wins matter to you? And that's what's really going to take Ben Bishop from a top 3 fantasy goaltender to a top 10 fantasy goaltender. That's the big pivot point there. The Colorado Avalanche currently boast the highest PDO in the league. They have the second best 5-on-5 shooting percentage, second best 5-on-5 save percentage, and yet they're 17th in Corsi for percentage. Yeah, they have a few things going for them. They're a little bit lucky. They're also 14th best at expected goals for 5-on-5, but they're actually first. They're 12th in expected goals against, but they're second in actual life. Second in power play opportunities, but 17th at converting, which was really surprising. I didn't think they would be that bad on the power play. They need to get better there. That's definitely an area that they could improve in. And if any team could, it's definitely going to be Colorado. And part of that, I think, has to do with Makar being out for quite a while here. That hurt them. And at the beginning, it took a little bit for Makar to get hot. So let's start first with Nathan MacKinnon. This is an easy one. I think he's a 120 floor guy end of season. Everything is pretty much right in line, and shots are up. Face-off wins are down 13%, and that's the only negative you can find on Nathan MacKinnon. Other than that, he is a monster, and I don't expect him to slow down anytime soon. Mikko Rantanen, I think, is a 95-plus guy, especially with the injuries, taking a few points off for there. He's just about as good as MacKinnon, though. Shooting percentage is insane at 22% right now, but he was 16% last year, so to assume that he might be a 20% or 18% shooter isn't that crazy, and I could see that happening. I think 22% is way too high, but a little bit lower, and he's kind of right in line. On-ice shooting percentage is also a touch high at 14.3%, 14.4%, but he plays with Nathan MacKinnon. Anything is possible when you play with MacKinnon. MacKinnon is kind of like Connor McDavid for Rantanen. If they play together, yeah, things are going to get a little insane. And then his shots are down 7%, which is one thing to pay attention to, but I think by the end of the season, that'll normalize and his shots will be just around the same. Gabriel Landeskog is the guy who's going to see a decrease in his projection here, and I think he's a 65 to 70 point guy now. Minutes are down a bit on the season. Shooting percentage is a tad high, and on-ice shooting percentage is in line. The IPP is a bit low, so I would like to see that higher. But more than anything, I just don't like that his minutes are down. And his deployment has changed a little bit and been seeing some time on the second line. I don't like that one bit. And to me, that's where the 65 to 70 really comes in. And the fact that the power play isn't doing that well, right? If he goes to that second line and the power play isn't doing that well, and Colorado is crushing it 5-on-5, well, he's missing out on a lot of McKinnon and Rantanen points. And so that's why his projection comes down a little bit. But he's still worth it because he just does so much in the peripheral departments. Nazem Kadri is pretty much 10 points better than last year. Everything else is pretty much the same except the points. I think he's a 55 to 60 point guy this year, end of season, and his hits are up. That's about it. He's a really, really good kind of depth center, I think. One of the best depth centers out there with some good upside depending on who he plays with. And then you have Cale Makar, a beast. I mean, there's not much to say about him. Around 65 points, in my opinion, once he comes back. I think his shooting percentage and IPP come down a little bit. I think they're a little bit high. But, I mean, 65 is still an unreal number, right? I think that's still insane. I think right now he's on an above 70-point pace or something like that. And the power play percentage is obviously high because he plays a lot of power play time. He's the best one they've got. And he's got better blocks than I anticipated as well, to be honest, which is really good for peripherals leagues. So all in all, I love Cale Makar. And I wouldn't be against actually trying to trade for him and just see what people think after the injury. People might have forgotten how good he is and still not be valuing him properly. So that's something I'd pay attention to and maybe see what's up.
I'm regressing him a little bit because although I do think I remember here that I think he's paving his way into being like the next Krug and Klingberg, like high point, low peripheral type defenseman. But the fact that he's shooting 14% and he has 55% IPP and he's got a 13.8% on ice shooting percentage and Colorado has so many power play opportunities are all coming together to prop him up a little bit more than I'd expect. So I'm expecting rest of the season for him to be at a 55 to 60 point pace. What will that get him? Yeah, that'll get him somewhere between 60 and 65, I guess.
Ryan Graves is a guy who kind of appeared out of nowhere, and he's been really, really good. I think he's a 35 point guy. Shots are up, but just not enough to matter. And very high on-ice shooting percentage of 14.4%. That, I think, will come down for a guy like Ryan Graves. And I think he's benefited from Cale Makar being out, and he's the one who's benefited from this high on-ice shooting percentage. So I would expect that to come down. But his hits and blocks are what matter. He's kind of like a baby Edler without the power play. That's kind of what he is. Someone said that in the YouTube comments, that he was like a baby Edler, and I completely agree, actually. He's been really, really good. So in a deeper league, especially a peripherals league, he's actually someone that I really like, and someone to pay attention to in Dynasty, potentially. Just because it's kind of hard to find these 30 to 35 point guys in Dynasty that are getting good deployment, have good upside, and get you a ton of peripherals at the same time. Then there's Sam Girard, who really is just not worth it for fantasy at this point. And I don't know when he will become relevant. I don't know if he ever will. Usually you don't take a team-friendly deal like Sam Girard did and then get traded anytime soon because that looks bad on the team, that they signed someone to a team-friendly deal and then just traded him away. Usually that hurts your chances in free agency. So I don't see him going anywhere, but I also don't see him going anywhere in terms of points on the Colorado Avalanche. So no shots, no power play. Decent blocks, but just not enough to hold. And same with hits. On the goaltending side of things, it's interesting because Philip Grubauer has been good, but just not good enough. 915 save percentage, 279 goals against average, and a 400 quality start percentage. Whereas Pavel Francouz...
Yes. Love him. Whoo, boy.
Has a 583 quality start percentage, 934 save percentage, 216 goals against average, and an 11 goals saved above average. And on the night of recording this, he had a fantastic game against the Vegas Golden Knights. So we've got a little bit of a controversy going on here in Colorado. And I wouldn't expect Pavel Francouz to steal a job, but I would expect Francouz to split time with Grubauer potentially going forward and maybe go with the hot hand. And by the end of it, it comes out to like a 1A, 1B split, similar to Halak and Rask in Boston. That's what I would kind of say. Francouz has been fantastic. And I mean, at this point, when you're Colorado, you just want to win games, right? You want to go with the hottest goaltender. And so I think at this point, they're just going to run with whichever one is hotter. And right now, Francouz is hotter. And I could see it very much becoming a split situation like the Islanders or like Boston, or a lot of teams are starting to do that, or Arizona, for example, just a lot of splits. And I could see that definitely happening here in Colorado. The defending Stanley Cup champions, the St. Louis Blues. Yeah, they're above average at virtually everything. There's not really anything you can point to and be like, yeah, they kind of suck at this. There's nothing. They're pretty much top 10 in everything that you look at. They're fourth in save percentage, pretty good at shooting percentage, somewhat in the middle of Corsi for percentage. That's the one area you can point to, be like, I guess they're okay. But this is what you want out of a playoff team. When you look at a playoff team, you want them to be good at everything. You don't want many weaknesses, so that night in and night out, they're a hard team to beat. And that's who the St. Louis Blues are. That's what made them so hard to beat last year in the playoffs, and they're continuing that now. They even have great goaltending. And David Perron is the one leading the charge on offense. 75 to 80 points, in my opinion. He's the real deal, I think. I think a lot of people aren't realizing that he's the real deal yet. Shooting percentage is lower than last year, which is good because it was kind of inflated last year, and the fact that it's lower means kind of like Laine, right? Okay, it's either more sustainable or he has room to improve. Either way, that's a net positive for him. IPP is a little bit lower than last year. On-ice shooting percentage is what has increased and helped his point totals. Last year, he was at 10.74 on-ice shooting. This year, he has a 12.53%. His shots are up 25% too, which with a pretty good shooting percentage, that means a lot more goals are going to go in. And his power play time has gone up 31%. He is the real deal. And, similar to some of the other guys I've said, I wouldn't be against kind of floating out to one of the David Perron owners, hey, what would you want for David Perron? And see what they say. I mean, I get that the rank is really high, but they may think, oh, well, he was preseason ranked this, so I can meet in the middle between preseason rank and real rank. But that the real rank is actually where he could finish realistically, or even better than that. And so that's why I would look at it. A lot of people tend to trade based on like the difference between preseason rank and meet in the middle. And then you're like, no, but the rank is real. And then you end up getting the player at a cheaper value. And that's what I would kind of take a look at. Then you have Ryan O'Reilly. I think around a 75 point guy. The reason for that is that his shots are down 39%. If his shots were to come up, then you'd see those points start to go up a little bit. And his shooting percentage is a touch low. So if that shooting percentage were to come back to normal and the shots come back up, which have completely disappeared, I think you could see him be above point per game potentially. His IPP is fine. His on-ice shooting percentage is fine. So, also if he were to get better, that would also help David Perron to get better. His power play percentage is super high still. His face-off win pace is down 9%, but I love Ryan O'Reilly still. Braden Shen is virtually the same player as last year, kind of like Mark Scheifele. Same pace, similar shots, similar on-ice shooting percentage. Power play percentage has gone up a lot, so he's pretty much last year, just with way more power play points. That's who he is. So take a look last year at what he was in rank, and then pretend that he got a lot of power play points, and how much more is that worth to you? And that's pretty much who he is. Hits are still super solid, and his face-off win pace is actually up 25% on the season, which is awesome. For Jaden Schwartz, he's a streamer, a very, very good streamer. 55 to 60 points in my opinion. Shots are down 15%. And you can tell recently his shots just haven't been as great. His secondary assist rate is way up, which is a tad scary. You don't like to see that. You like to see that more to their normal secondary assist rate. And so that's something to watch with Jaden Schwartz. I want to see him get more primary assists going forward. He's all right, just not crazy high on him. He's a streamer, in my opinion. That's kind of who Jaden Schwartz is. And he's been on the wire in my league many, many a time. Pietrangelo is a 50 to 55 point guy, in my opinion. Shooting percentage is a touch low, but right in line with his expected goals. It's his on-ice shooting percentage and IPP that are totally fine. And I way more primary assists this year, which is really good. I don't want to see, like I said, increase in secondary assists. When you see increases in primary assists, that's awesome. That means he's getting more involved in the offense. And on top of that, his shots are up 30%. But at the detriment of blocks and hits, which are way down. But I'll take the shots and the points increase. In net, you have Jordan Binnington, who somehow got even better at high-danger shots. I don't know exactly how that happened, but he got worse at mid-danger and low-danger saves. He makes no sense, but he's damn good. That's all I know. I think he's a 9.15, 9.20 goaltender as opposed to the 9.24 he was last year, so I think we'll see a little bit of a decrease there. But he's fantastic for wins. I mean, I think he's a top 5 goaltender the rest of the season, right up there with the best of them. And then, as a backup role, what a fitting way to end the podcast with the Devil. Yeah, the Devil, Jake Allen. He's been good. He's I think he's the best spot start of the season, actually. A 6.00 quality start percentage, 9.30 save percentage, 2.21 goals against average, and a 6.95 goals saved above average. He's been fantastic. Amazing. And on top of that, he's on a team that's first in the league in the Western Conference. I mean, he's a fantastic spot start. I don't think I'd use him as a handcuff because I don't think he's going to get enough starts for that. But, man, as a spot start, incredible, incredible value. So there you go. That is the holiday special. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a ton of fun to make. It took a ton of time. We put a lot of time into it. Be sure to check out the giveaway down in the comments and the script as well, so you can reference back to it or follow along if you ever want to watch it again for whatever reason. And be sure to leave your comments as well. Happy to answer any questions and discuss. And we'll catch you for the midweek preview. And there may be some kind of special episode coming out around New Year's, so pay attention to that. Thanks a ton for watching. We'll catch you next time.